I'm thrilled to be here and also to speak up after Pavlina, whose research I was following for years, and also Łukasz and Karol. I think that this paper will resonate with some of the questions, maybe pose a certain resolutions to questions that were here, etc., etc. I'm myself largely interested in audiovisual art from 60s, 70s, the moment when sound enters the galleries and changes everything. I mean, the rules of the game are suddenly challenged on different levels, and I'm really interested what that means for exhibiting now. But I'm part of a larger team of a great institution with amazing collection, and my research is also really rooted in the methodology that also my colleagues developed. Muzeum Sztuki is an institution dedicated to modern art. You could hear that I was introduced by Marika as the head of modern art department. Modern art means a lot for of different things for us in the team of the museum. It means also contemporary art, like it did back in the day when the museum was founded. In 1931, the museum gets a generous donation from a group of artists, including Władysław Strzemiński and Katarzyna Kobro, who asked for donations around Avant-Garde International. And you can see the first show of that collection that was named International Collection of Modern Art of AR Group. AR stands for revolutionary artists or real avant-garde. There are two different extensions of this notion, of this abbreviation. And for Strzemiński and Kobro, the collection was meant to be serving a pedagogical purpose. It was like a lot of avant-garde art. It was meant for emancipatory reasons. Setting it up in Łódź, that was a workers' city at the time, and a strictly modern city because it was largely built in 19th and 20th century, was a social, had a social goal. You can see on the photograph that there are works of Hans Arp, there are works of Prampolini, Theo van Doesburg. The collection had also the first mobile by Alexander Calder, which we really are sorry that it got lost during the Second World War. But for a lot of those pieces stayed in the collection, and because of this institution has a father and mother figure. The father also, Władysław Strzemiński, was speaking or writing largely about the purpose of the collection itself and the museum. I'm quoting for him from an article on the aims of the museological enterprises. The difference between the museum and an exhibition is based on possibly precise eliminating of chance effect. An exhibition offers a description of a singular moment of the artistic life. Museum is presenting the evolution and mutual dependence of individual movements. An exhibition offers singular aesthetic impression. Museum's primary aim is didactics, enabling the presentation of development trends of every period and the ingredients that are forming true art that is worthy of its era. Therefore, museum is not capable to accept aesthetic sham that is erected to dazzle the viewer. Therefore, not only single object, but even their placement should be regulated by a strictly considered outline. Now, the social level of this enterprise was also founded on the fact that both Strzemiński and Kobro were coming to an age as artists in Soviet Russia. Strzemiński was, moreover, for a brief moment, the chief of the whole network of the museums of artistic culture. Hence, this short-lived moment when avant-garde was meant to be institutionalized in the Soviet Union. Hence, he and Kobro brought the ideas, but tried to redesign it for a very different country and social system. Of course, the whole set of original rules was still in play after the Second World War, when the museum got new building that enabled a former industrialist palace. That's one of the bright moments of socialism, nationalization of wealth of rich people, and offering it back to the population. So this is a palace, and this is one of the floors of the palace on the Więckowskiego Street. And you can see that the layout of the galleries that was created largely by Marian Minich, the first director of the museum, who was the director since 1935 and returned after the Second World War to lead the institution again. Developed a very interesting evolution of styles until the abstract art. This floor plan can be compared to Alfred J. Barr Jr.'s the chart. I won't show it, but I believe all of you know it. It is based on evolutionary strategies and Welflin and things like that. There was a brief moment when the museum had also German directors. One of them organized, probably, because we're not kind of sure, although we have a list of objects for that exhibition, Entartete und jüdische Kunst Ausstellung, based only on the holdings of the museum. So, we have most of those objects. We can still realize that exhibition. But for this narration that includes, expressionism, symbolism, realism, impressionism, fauvism, etc., it also includes some names that are sound strange for people who know the collection really well. For example, the room 28 on the bottom of this drawing has in names Van Gogh, Gauguin, and Cézanne. Those works are not in the collection. They were represented by facsimile reproductions that Minich started buying in the 30s, already including them in the collection shows because of the pedagogical strategy he had. Of course, I mean, Poland was still not a country that was really infected by all the dark sides of the art market and this obsession with the originality of the work of art. So at one moment in the 50s, Minich dreams even of a whole network of museums of reproductions, which would be, every single city in Poland would have a sister institution of Muzeum Sztuki with all of its holdings, with just not the originals. Anyway, but this whole narration was ending in the peak moment that is the neoplastic room designed by Władysław Strzemiński. Those two gentlemen had different moments, but they kind of joined forces again to build this Cabinet der Abstrakten of the Łódź Museum. You can see the only photograph that we have of the original layout of the gallery, just because this was destroyed 2 years after it was created. This was painted white. All the pieces were replaced with realistic paintings. And abstract art ended up during the Stalinist era, brief, but still hurtful for some artists in Poland in the storages. The neoplastic room was meant to be the peak, the Hegelian moment of suspension of history, the final resolution of the promise given by modernity, you name it. Every single moment of the highest expectation we have for avant-garde art was meant to be invested there. So the failure of the neoplastic room, and then for the death of Strzemiński 2 years after, was one of those tragic moments that effectively embedded themselves into the reading of the room. 10 years after it was painted white, the neoplastic room was restored. We're discussing this notion actively in the museum. Jarosław Suchan, our director, hates the notion of reconstruction because it takes out the aura of the room, which is still the same. I mean, beneath, as you can see, beneath all those white layers of paint, there's still the original paint out there. But there was an internal discussion also if this, because the museum was gaining a new space around 10 years ago in Manufaktura district. There was a question if, because the new space was meant to be housing the collection, if the neoplastic room should go together with the collection and again become a theological moment for the whole narration. And the answer was not really. It should stay where it is, and the collection should be removed to MS2, also because by that it would be relieved from the obligation to serve only for the purpose of the neoplastic room itself, and the tragic story of personal stories of Kobro and Strzemiński. But then we've replaced for a few years ago the symbolic moment of the neoplastic room with another object, a set of objects that questions or challenges the orthodox notions of the originality of work of art. This is, of course, you probably know, this is a work of Kazimierz Malewicz, but not the one you think of. This is the one from Belgrade, and this is a piece from 1985. It is there because it marks I mean, it is in the collection of the museum for different reasons, intricate to this particular piece, but also it is there because of our of institutional history. Strzemiński and Kobro were part of the Soviet avant-garde, but for political and personal reasons, the museum doesn't have a huge collection of Russian avant-garde. Moreover, a lot of those pieces were promised to the museum by Malewicz, who was friends with Strzemiński, but ended up in Berlin and for different historical reasons ended in Stedelijk Museum, etc., etc. There's a mythical letter somewhere. Maybe it will be uncovered one day, and the Stedelijk will have to give it back to Łódź. Let's hope. But for the moment, we have we have what we have, and it's great because it allows us also to speak a lot about various things in connection to our history and to for the pedagogical for reasons for setting up institution in Łódź. But then, you know, like this also object, because it's not work of art also. I mean, the author, Kazimir Malewicz from Belgrade, is not an artist, or he ceased to be an artist in late 70s. So it is in the institution of art. So what it is, because I think that largely we use the notion of archives also to unlock this moment of strange things not necessarily being meant to be works of art appearing in the institution. So this is rather an archive of memories of the modern art than it is a work of art per se. You know, it also marks an interesting moment for my research itself, because you know working with archives is a kind of a revenge that the art of the East took on the West. I'm saying about the revenge because it's only since the 90s that we're so obsessed with the archives, and that's because a lot of the artists from the region just don't have anything to show except for that. You know, it's a revenge by Ilya Kabakov on the Western art, of Kwiekulik on Western art. That suddenly also Western artists need to uncover their own storages to show that yes, we have archives too. But my own work on those questions was largely also developed together with David Crowley, with whom I had the pleasure of working for two shows. Our collaboration started in 2012 on the Sounding the Body Electric exhibition, which was a lot about, you know, renegotiating the history of so-called sound art in the Eastern Bloc. A lot of those blockbuster shows in the West had the notion of sound art histories and were meant to be surveys of sound art, but suddenly they were including only Milan Knižák of our region. Just like this, those artists, composers would not be interested in that. And of course we needed to develop a very certain methodology. Also because not only all the things that appear in an art context appear as archives, they might also appear as art. Because we needed to work with composers that were working since the late 50s with graphic scores. We needed to work with composers that were doing films, for example. And what these objects, these works were not meant to be displayed in cases of, in vitrines of any art institution. So, you know, the category of archive is growing to include, you know, various materials that served for preparation of artworks, or materials documenting it, or, you know, materials that are actively contextualizing it even, that appear in the art institution to offer some encoding material for the artwork. But, you know, we were dealing with objects that were largely audiovisual, and they were posing their own questions that you can't find anywhere else. For example, there's you can see in the far end, there's a video documenting a performance of Milan Gregar, an artist really interesting for our argument, because this graphic artist, draughtsman also, started recording sound of drawings being prepared, and this offered him an opportunity to speak about the process. But they were also for musical moments on their own right, with a very interesting contact microphones technology, very interesting post-industrial kind of sound environment being created. And then, of course, you know, I would say that the exhibition design equalizes every single object. I'm using the equalizing metaphor as if you're using the mastering technology of, you know, a sound engineer. Equalizes every single object so that they start appearing to look as art. Because, for example, those publications were published graphic scores by composers from the experimental studio of Polish Radio. And then there's an art object and a reel-to-reel tape recorder that suddenly, you know, are making a very interesting, having a very interesting moment to themselves. But then we were puzzled with what to do with this, for example. It's a set of memories of an event that took place in 1968 that was created by an architect, Teresa Kelm, Zygmunt Krause, a composer, and Henryk Morel, a sculptor, here in Warsaw in Galeria Współczesna. It's a documentation of a very early sound installation that was really simple. I mean, so simple that it's just hard to imagine that nobody before came with this idea. So there are 6 booths that are, you know, semi-transparent. Each booth is fitted with a loudspeaker and a color light. And then the member of the audience is allowed to roam freely through those booths. Each booth has a different soundtrack created by Krause together with his ensemble, Warsztat Muzyczny, so that they intermingle. That was a reaction towards you know, this the traditional concert situation where the audience is largely passive. So the artists wanted to offer this as a composition to be composed actively by the members of the public. That's 1968. I don't need to speak about the emancipatory potential of that thing. It's interesting, challenging, etc., etc. But you know, we could just do this and stop at that. Also, because it was interesting for us because the title was Spatial Musical Composition, which was really close to how Katarzyna Kobro was titling her sculpture pieces. But also Krause, for years that were leading to this moment, was fascinated by unistic paintings of Władysław Strzemiński. So this piece was a missing link of the reception of the 60s of the original avant-garde. You know, so the neo-avant-garde really restoring kind of the traditions, or for being able to try to find the precedents. As was this film by Józef Robakowski, which is a documentary on Katarzyna Kobro, and it was featuring recreations or reconstructions of her sculptures. This was made by Robakowski himself with one of the former students of Strzemiński, Bolesław Utkin. Funnily enough, the same person that was also reconstructing the neoplastic room. But then this object that was meant to be a free, rather slowly moving in the space, it's a hanging composition, was set into a motion that is rather of the 60s era and mechanical engines era than what it was back in the day. So it's an act of active reinterpretation, rather, in a sense of kinetic art, not in the sense of the original sculpture itself. And then this a precedent of the moment of this recreation also opened the door for me and David to think through how we can approach the question posed by spatial musical composition. And the answer was also offered by Robert Ashley in his composition, Yes, but is it edible? The lines in this, I'll tell you the compositional instructions. The lines should be uttered with one breath. And then after each line, there is a mark with a piano that this ended and the next line starts. Please listen to the argument, because it includes something really important that inspired us to treat the installations as if they are graphic scores.
Notation systems in any language, and particularly in music, refer specifically to a family of instruments or even to a particular instrument. The more precise, coherent, and descriptive the system, the more specific and limited the relationship between the notation and the instrument becomes. These simple observations have become so self-evident in the era of computer languages that they hardly bear repeating except for the didactic purposes of explaining my work in music. The notation system produces a certain kind of music, the limitations of which are built into the music to be heard, and the notation system will not produce any other kind of music. There was a lot of experimenting that ended about 30 years ago based on the hypothesis that space equaled time in musical notation. These were experiments because in the traditional notation of Western music, space had never been equated with time except in transcription. The experiments were designed to determine if musicians could learn to read space as time. The experiments were not a failure. Apart from the simple fact that an experiment cannot fail, it may be shown to have been inadequate, misdesigned, or specious, but it cannot fail. Even the metaphorical use, such as the use of the term experimental to apply to musical notation, the results were spectacularly successful in teaching musicians that what they knew was not all of what could be known. Western music had reached a state of arrogance that was an embarrassment to everybody, even to...
Oh, sorry. I'm running out of time anyway. You can find the whole thing on Ubu Web, so you know I'm not stealing anything from you. But this moment of realizing how important for the 60s and the graphic notation, I mean, Robert Ashley is actively one of the heroes of this revolution, was introduced. Was the notion of space and the fact that space is part of the graphic notation to be read by the musicians themselves. Suddenly, this appeared more as a graphic score in its own right and a composition, but a musical composition that is realized in space than anything else. And this opened the door for something that we call here a reconstruction, but I think it's false also, because we should treat it as another performance of the same graphic score that was first written in 1968. So the floor plan that you saw might be treated more as something that can be repeated and begins to be achronological, and this can just have different moments of being reperformed, reinterpreted, open for different forms of interpretation also. You can see that we, of course, did the whole layout, and I'll present you in a moment with some sounds, how it really sounded. But then the most important thing is that we also acquired the piece for the collection, but we didn't acquire anything, any physical object, but rather negotiated with the living artist the way how this musical piece should be performed in the future. So we've negotiated the performance instructions because, of course, they won't be around forever, and me, myself, or my colleagues in the museum will not be around forever, but the collection is meant to be staying out there. So it's part of the archive and part of the collection because it can be realized at different points in time. And it will be realized really soon on the exhibition about experimental studio of Polish radio that I'm preparing together with Michał Mendyk in Karlsruhe in ZKM. Let's hear just a little bit of how, let's imagine you're roaming through the space. I could present you more examples of pieces that we've realized using this methodology, like Wojciech Bruszewski, Junction, a sound installation from 1973, or Szabolcs Szesztényi and Krzysztof Wodiczko, Just Transistor Radios, a piece, a real graphics score that we performed and acquired for the collection from 1969. But also this strict methodology that we've kind of developed for this project also influences a more free-form area of my own activity. I'm a member of artists and curators group, Grupa Budapest, together with Igor Krenz and Michał Libera. And what we deal with is we're doing unorthodox reinterpretations, restagings of different moments of audiovisual art. We call it analysis, and it is based on the fact that we're through research are working on finding the methodology that comes from within the artwork itself in question, that then produces another reinterpretation of it. So, for example, for this piece that was just exhibited in Warsaw in Studio Gallery, we did a remake of Michael Snow's Remo's Nephew, but the remake was actually a set of songs based on different chapters of this monumental film that BNNT group consisting of Konrad Smoleński, Daniel Szwed, and Macio Moretti performed in this 2 by 2 by 2 meters black cube within the gallery, so that people could only hear the roaming. This will come up as a CD soon, so you're, you know, I decided to include also this because as a less rigid, orthodox moment of things that I'm doing outside of the museum itself, because they're interconnected, and the methodology is in fact similar but more open to free-form connections and chance encounters. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Daniel, for this extremely interesting presentation.